Randi, and this week we have two very special guests here, Jasmine Burnett and Latasha Mays, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And Jasmine, you can go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Burnett, and I'm Field Director for New Voices for Reproductive Justice. I lead our organizing, advocacy, and leadership development work in across the state of Ohio, starting in Cleveland, and in Philadelphia, and across the state of Pennsylvania.
Hi, everyone. I'm Latasha Mays. I'm the founder and executive director of New Voices for Reproductive Justice, and I have been part of the organization since we were obviously founded in 2004. I've served in this capacity since then, and I'm responsible for making sure that we are building a robust and powerful movement for reproductive justice in Pennsylvania and Ohio.
So you heard you ladies mention reproductive justice, which a lot of people are not familiar with. So if you want to, expand on your work and what is reproductive justice?
Well, we define reproductive justice in New Voices as the human right to control your body, your sexuality, your gender, your work, and your reproduction. Functionally, reproductive justice is a social change movement led by women of color. It is a framework for reproductive freedom for all people, and that is an everyday day of life that affirms who you are in all of your identities.
The way that we accomplish reproductive justice, particularly as we are expanding our work in Cleveland, is through building the leadership of folks who are already leading work here. So we have our leadership councils, which we have a leadership council as well in Philadelphia. But our leadership council here, we actually are pretty lucky to have one of our board members, Maria Miranda, who is a fierce activist and is also on the board for NARAL Pro-Choice Ohio, which shows how closely we're connected, but to really have them helping us to understand how we need to lead our work and where the gaps actually are, and where we need to hold and create space for Black women and women of color in Cleveland, particularly because there's so many restrictions around reproductive health care, and there's a significant amount of police violence and community violence that is really plaguing our communities. And particularly when you look at who's leading on those issues, they typically tend to be Black men. And in this particular community, and I'm sure it mirrors very much of what's happening across the state of Ohio, and that's what we're actually here to do, is to build the leadership of Black women and women of color so that we can lead, because our communities and our families don't exist and don't function without us.
Exactly. And, you mentioned Black men, so I'd like to talk about Black men a little bit. Something I wanted to do, with NARAL is obviously to incorporate more Black women, because as I had mentioned on earlier in our panel discussion earlier, so we're at our national conference right now in Cleveland, that a lot of times that I'm the only Black woman in the room when we go to, the State House and hear testimony. So it's like not only, and, I've been trying to get more Black women incorporated. I recently did an event and had some Black women come out. Actually, one of my partners, a Black woman from Planned Parenthood, and she's their community educator. And so we decided to get together and be like, there's no Black women coming to, these events and coming to give testimony. So so we initially started just by going out to some Black-owned businesses and talking to them, saying, how do you feel about abortion? How do you feel about choice? And seeing if we could go in and have some events there. But as I said, we haven't had many Black men come to any events. And so I wanted to get your feedback on how I can better reach out to Black men, how you all have been reaching out to Black men to get them more involved, because that's important because they're involved as well.
Well, if I could say that New Voices, just as reproductive focuses on intersectional multiple issues, so does New Voices. We obviously focus, our work is around several key issues, including sexual and reproductive health, including and affirming abortion rights, abortion care, abortion access. We also advocate for LGBTQ rights and liberation. We advocate for health care and making sure that Black women, Black men have access to affordable, quality, and culturally competent health care wherever they may be. But also we've worked with the Affordable Care Act and winning key victories in the implementation of the ACA, and being a part of the work that eventually won Medicaid expansion in Pennsylvania. We also focus on ending gender-based violence, including sexual violence that Black women and women of color are facing in their daily lives. We work on issues of incarceration in our community, which impacts Black men certainly, but Black women and women of color are the fastest growing segment in the prison industrial complex.
Yes.
And then thirdly, we also do work around environmental justice. Because we take that type of broad intersectional approach in our work, we have been able to engage Black men, men of color, and allied men in our communities to support our work. Specifically, we've added another area of our work, which is called integrated voter engagement. We have a project called Voice Your Vote. It's Black men who are going out into communities that we serve and engaging Black women around building voting power, turning out to vote, and being educated on the candidates that are running in each and every election. So we embrace any ally who supports our mission, which is to which is dedicated to building a movement for the health and well-being of Black women and girls, our families, and our communities. And so that's how we've been able to engage Black men. Where I see us going is we just at our strategic planning retreat, we had probably the first conversation about how Black men can support Black women in our fight for reproductive justice, and understanding that it's connected, that we're connected in this struggle because it's a struggle for human rights and acknowledgement of our humanity and our dignity. And so it's a conversation that's just beginning. But I look at my own brother, I look at my nephews, and how my brother has been supportive of New Voices in Philadelphia, which is where I'm from, but he's going to be an active volunteer. And my nephews are going to grow up knowing and learning about reproductive justice. And so that's some of the ways we've been able to engage. But it is hard for men. I think that this work, it's important that we center Black women and women of color, and at the same time, who we're engaging, they're bringing partners with them who are men, whether it's cis men or trans men. And so we need to make sure that there are spaces where they feel welcome, but they also can support Black women and women of color being at the center.
Exactly. And to go into that, because you must have been reading my mind, you mentioned trans men. Because we can speak frankly here, as we know, a lot of times in movements for racial justice around Black people, it seems that straight Black people sometimes think that LGBT Black people are somehow don't care about the same things, or somehow not Black people as well, are not impacted. Like they don't need to be a part of the movement as well. Marriage equality, which was an issue basically for rich white gay men, but still an issue that I was happy about. And my aunt kind of made me laugh because when I said I was so happy about it, then she called me. She was like asking me, are you gay? Because you're excited. I'm not like, well, I have to be gay to want for everyone to have equal rights, but it's kind of like a definite disconnect. And because when I did recently have this event for women of color, there was no queer women that came, and I want them there in the room because all of this affects them as well. So, I would like both of y'all's feedback on how I can, how we can bridge that disconnect sometimes of straight Black people not, incorporating, queer Black people and their issues, to know that they are different, but they're similar as well.
Sure. I think that, at New Voices, we have amongst our membership, our meetups, all of our programs, you have a wide variety of experiences, sexuality, identities, expressions. And I think that we show up as our authentic selves. We command and demand respect and mutual respect. And I think that when you hold a space with that, and you know that people can come to that space knowing that that level of concern and care for them is going to be uplifted, that they will be more prone to coming to your space. I want to also speak on, and I'm sure Latasha could speak more about this, but our Lord Baldwin Leadership Institute, we just graduated our first class of LGBTQ folks of color in Pittsburgh. So that is a way that we're being very intentional about our programming and about our work in making it intersectional, inclusive, reflective, and representative of the LGBTQ community. And, you know, quite frankly, the leadership of New Voices represents the Black LGBTQ community. And if we look historically at the movement building that has happened on behalf of Black lives and that continues to happen on behalf of Black lives for all Black lives,
it's Black trans women.
It's Black trans women, it's Black cis women, it's Black lesbian women. And so I think that as we uplift, you know, reproductive rights, reproductive health, and specifically reproductive justice, that we not only focus on the ability to give birth and reproduce physically, but we also think about, you know, what values are we reproducing in our community? How are we creating levels of accountability and connection and interconnectedness within our community where we've been told that maybe we shouldn't involve or include a certain demographic of our community based on their sexuality, gender identity, or expression. So I think that's one thing that we do actually very well at New Voices, and we're hoping that folks could possibly and hopefully learn from our example.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, LGBTQ people, queer and trans people of color really flock to New Voices and reproductive justice work because we are inviting people to be their full selves. And it does have to be intentional, does have to be representative, and that we have to be resolute in who we are and who we represent, even if we're engaging in mainstream, like heteronormative politics and institutions and systems. We have to disrupt the everyday workings of those institutions, and we have been doing that from the very beginning. If I can give an example, in advocating for a non-discrimination ordinance in our county where Pittsburgh is, you know, the legislation wanted to leave gender identity out and leave the trans community out. And New Voices, one, was the only Black organization that was supporting and advocating and leading the policy work for that bill. But we said we're not going to support a bill that's going to exclude people. The whole point of this bill is to include as many people as possible in civil rights protections in housing, education, and public accommodations. And so I think that because we are unapologetic about the identity of New Voices as a welcoming and affirming and inclusive organization, and reproductive justice is a movement that is for all people and all Black people and all people of color, I think that really resonates with the people we're serving and why New Voices has been able to grow as we have over the last 12 years.
And I wanted to ask, have y'all, I shouldn't say, do like organizing with churches and the faith community, and you know, what type of things have y'all been doing out there? And if y'all could give me some pointers on doing more with Black churches, because I know there's a lot of Black churches who are pro-choice. It's a lot. It's not at all. It's not inclusive.
Well, that has been part of our strategy, but I wouldn't say that it's been one of our primary strategies. It is important, and we certainly have engaged with faith communities. We've had the greatest support from the Unitarians of all, across both states, the United Church of Christ. But we have instances where we've had support from the Nation of Islam around issues of domestic violence and ending gender-based violence. Sitting down with the leaders, Black women who are the leaders of their churches and their denominations, where I did an information session with them on reproductive justice, where we have engaged with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice at the national level, but also in our statewide coalitions, both in Pennsylvania and Ohio. So I think the work is there. as we engage more Black women across a variety of experiences, I think there's lots of room and opportunities if they want to take our work into their places and houses of worship. And we know that we have good models like Sister Reach in Tennessee who can support us in, the most effective strategies for engaging people of faith.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about y'all's civic engagement, because the presidential election feels like it's happening tomorrow, even though it's not. It's next year, but they talk about it so much.
Yes.
So I wanted to hear, a little bit more about, y'all's plan for civic engagement for next year, or in the civic engagement, you have done in the past.
Yeah, we have a program that we began, I want to say in 2000, it all began in 2004 when we started. Voter engagement and civic engagement was our key value in 2004. We said that we wanted to develop new voices of leadership because we didn't see ourselves represented in any type of leadership in our city where we were founded in Pittsburgh. And so we had worked in 2004 presidential election, 2008 and 2012, but only specifically during those presidential elections. But we realized that we had to be a part of engaging Black women in voting and connecting it to their issues in an ongoing way. And so we, through the great support of the Groundswell Fund, as the Reproductive Justice Foundation that supports so many of our colleagues across the country, they invested in us to ramp up our Voice Your Vote project through this concept of integrated voter engagement, where you're not just shooting in 2 months before the election, trying to get the Black vote, trying to get the Black women vote, trying to get the gay vote or your youth vote or what have you, but you're building it's a relational strategy where you're in people's communities year round and you're working with them and developing their leadership and fighting on behalf of key issues year round. So it's like when it's time to vote, they already are ready to vote. They've engaged their families and their communities, and then they show up and they exercise their voting power that on election day. And our work is nonpartisan because of our IRS status as a 501c3, but there's so much you are able to do even within that limitation. So over the last year, we have engaged 80,000 Black women around voting and voter education, voter mobilization, voter turnout, and what level of races are happening each and every year. We intend to build our work, that's our voter engagement work has been very successful in Pittsburgh, but to replicate it throughout Pennsylvania and Philadelphia through New Voices Philly. And how do we engage people in these rural parts of Pennsylvania and Ohio where there are people of color in strong numbers, and turn them out to vote for the candidate they feel will best represent their interests, and for us to best advocate a policy agenda in support of reproductive justice.
And so to kind of go into that, because I'm a political nerd. That's how I got started in the movement, is working on electoral campaigns. And so let me see how I frame my question. Do y'all see it more as, we're getting people out to vote, but at the same time, it's like, I remember I was out canvassing. This was in Maryland. This woman told me I was in a Black neighborhood canvassing, trying to get out the vote for my candidate, who was a white man, because most candidates are. And she was just like, she was just feeling like, I don't know if I want to vote because we keep getting these same people, and they don't. I mean, I'm sure he's a nice man, which he was, but at the same time, you don't have my same lived experience. You don't know what it is we're going through, day to day. So even, in the civic engagement and getting people out to vote, it's like we still have these same candidates that's still going up there. So I wanted to, hear y'all feedback about, what it is we can do to try to have more Black people, Black women running for office, because if we're not the decision makers, then it's still just, like you said, it's still them just coming to us, every 2 years. Oh, I need to get the Black vote out. But they not really, after that, you haven't really done anything. You haven't been a champion for policies.
Haven't thought about Black people since they voted for them.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think I can speak about some of the work that we did in West Philadelphia on a local level, and then LaTosha can speak to some of the work that we have coming up with really trying to get Black women motivated to run for office. And so I wrote an article on Women's Equality Day about 2 years ago. And the title is what Black women in West Philadelphia think about Women's Equality Day. And, I think about the history of Women's Equality Day and the actual suffragist movement, and how, even then Black women, stood shoulder to shoulder with our sister allies in that work and were invisibilized as a result. And so I thought about the particular legacy in West Philadelphia, and that it is home to the largest number of African Americans in the city. Maybe shortly, like very narrowly close to North Philadelphia. And also in the 80s, there was a Black nationalist organization called MOVE. And I had not been aware of that history until I moved to West Philadelphia and saw this film on PBS called Let the Fire Burn. And I became really motivated to see, what impact does having that brutal and violent history that was state sanctioned against Black people on an entire block in West Philadelphia that displaced hundreds of Black families and devastated thousands of Black people across that city. I wondered, what do we think about Women's Equality Day in the context of holding that history? Many of the people who I spoke with were at least in their, aware that happened. Some people were a bit younger that I spoke with, but it really was connected to a larger policy agenda that we're working on in Pennsylvania called the Pennsylvania Agenda for Women's Health, which looks at this broad public policy agenda on issues around, equal pay, nursing accommodations, pregnancy accommodations, and just domestic violence. And so I said, do Black women know that this is happening? And do they know that this is definitely connected to the legislators that they're voting for? And let me see what they actually think about voting and, what they think about Women's Equality Day. And so, I got a lot of varied responses, but I think that what was most telling about my interviews, and I just honestly went up to random Black women on the street and said, "Excuse me, can I please talk to you? I have some questions." And, there were some of the older Black women were saying, these younger Black women, they don't get out and vote. They're kind of throwing us under the bus a little bit. And then some of the younger Black women, that I interviewed gave me hope and restored my faith in the work that we're actually doing to advance reproductive justice and to make sure that the work that we do on behalf of Black women and girls is relevant at these mainstream tables and is centered at these mainstream tables. And I think that, with New Voices, we create opportunities for people to get involved and to exercise that passion and that desire that they have for change. And through that article, we got quite a bit of, a lot of hits. It was republished nationally. And I think that it really begins with, do you have the respect for Black women and the eagerness to engage them and involve them in a process that will essentially free them, their community, and their families? And if you come to them understanding, come to us with that understanding that, the respect has to be there first.
Yes.
And when the respect is there, then, you will respect what I say I need. And then you will find ways, and we will come together on ways in which I can come to the table and be my full self. And so I think LaTosha could definitely add to that.
Yeah, I think in our current political system, without organized people and organized money, we don't have the power. But, we do. We know Black women are the most active and progressive segment of what we're calling the rising American electorate, but Black women have already risen as leaders in the electorate, but it's also called a new American majority. And when we don't see ourselves represented, for me, the only option is then we do it ourselves. And because of the work that I've been blessed to be a part of in New Voices and our movement for reproductive justice across this country, I said that, okay, I don't see people who represent reproductive justice or Black women's experiences. I'm going to run myself. And I ran for city council in the primary that was back in May 2015. And I while I did not win that election, there was so many other victories around, wow, Black women should run in majority districts. Black women can engage a variety of voters and supporters and also raise money. But often you have to prove yourself worthy to even be a part of the political machinery. And so what reproductive justice organizing allowed me to do was to leverage this great network, both locally, statewide, and nationally, to have a successful campaign that people still ask me about, and they want to know why and how and what made me do it. But it's not seeing myself is what made me do it. In Pennsylvania, we don't have any. We barely have white women who are elected in Pennsylvania, let alone Black women or women of color. I see my sisters in Western PA. They're going to run for state level elected office. For me, when I run again, I'm going to run for probably state level office, because that's where a lot of the policy that we care about around reproductive justice is happening, like our Pennsylvania campaign and agenda for women's health. And so people need to be inspired to support a candidate.
Yes.
And let me tell you, when you are a person who has been oppressed in so many ways, living in Pittsburgh, living in Cleveland, living in Philadelphia, and you see somebody with your same experience saying, I'm going to run and I'm going to put myself out there for the greater good of our community, someone who's trusted on the issues that you care about, someone who's in your community working every day to make it better. Exactly. That inspires people to support and maybe think, I might be able to do that too, on whatever level. It might be on a community level. It might be running for office. It might even working on campaigns like you've done, where we know that infrastructure isn't there. A good dear friend of mine has been a part of New Voices since she was in college. Jessica Bird is one of a leading political strategist in this country. She's a young Black woman, and she recognized that people don't even have the opportunity, Black people don't even have the opportunity to work on a campaign, fundraise for a campaign, do communications for a campaign, canvas, be a part of the strategy for a campaign. That doesn't exist. So how are we going to have candidates that are going to run? And they don't, and we don't always have the knowledge, certainly the access to money, and then also so-called progressive organizations don't support you when you do want to run.
I know. We won't talk about all these unpaid interns.
Right.
Who can afford to go to Washington and get that experience and be an unpaid intern?
Exactly.
No one. Can a poor Black kid afford to go to Washington and be an unpaid intern and get that experience?
So you miss those opportunities, experience, because of not necessarily educational or educational barriers or passion or knowledge on politics, but it's the opportunities. And so the work that Jessica Bird is doing through her new business and initiatives for people of color is amazing. They're training politicos, which is, that's what we need.
Yes.
There's thousands and thousands of these opportunities to work for elected officials or work for people who are running, but there's no mechanism or infrastructure to prepare Black people and people of color to be a part of that, and Black women. And she's very clear that she is interested in Black women running for office. Yeah. And so that's where we are, and I'm inspired by the Black women who are running at all levels, the work that Higher Heights is doing, the work, just all the different individual efforts for, like, Donna Edwards is running for Senate.
Yeah, she is.
Like, how don't we have Black women senators? And so there's an interesting thing. We were in our own voice, our Black women's National Reproductive Justice agenda strategic summit, strategy summit, and someone did a presentation on the power that white men have in our political system. It was like 9 times greater than the power of women of color. And so I can't expect white men to represent my intersectional experience in their decision making. I have a policy background in my education and in my work, and I always said that we need to have educational policy advocacy, because I can't fight for one issue without looking at how it's going to impact certain groups of people.
Yes.
And until we do that, until we disrupt the system that says it has to be done this way, it will be always on the side of not having power in our political system.
I'm a big, proponent of education, because I believe that, education is one of the main ways that poor people in general, especially poor people of color, can come out of poverty. Because a lot of people, for some reason, they think I'm like crazy when I tell, but I'm like, I don't know why, but I don't know who lies about living in the projects. But anyway, I lived in the projects. My mom made just this much, too much money to get on food stamps. But I was able to go to a good school in Georgia, and get a scholarship. Thank you, Bill Gates, the Bill Gates Millennium Scholarship.
Thank you, Bill Gates. I'm also
Which
a
is
recipient.
a scholarship. You are? Mm-hmm. Then you know exactly what it is. Yeah, it makes a difference for you to be able to get out of poverty. But, like you say, it's all of those things, but education is definitely, near and dear to my heart. When I did my first campaign, my first long campaign in Georgia, it was because, some of the schools there, the budget had been slashed so much that some of the schools had to go down to 4 days a week because the budget was slashed so much. But
we want to get into like economic debt and access to higher education and like for-profit entities that prey on Black women and low-income people for, saddle them with tremendous debt, and they don't actually come out with a degree of the quality necessary to attain a job that would allow them to live a healthy and productive and, secure life. So I was listening to NPR, and I just see that so much in our communities, how, Black women are often exploited into low-wage, low-income jobs, especially service positions in so many communities. And like with the support of unions that organize
home healthcare workers.
Home healthcare.
I worked for SCIU for 2 years in the healthcare division, and then in Virginia. And my chapter I was with was the Virginia Association of Personal Care Assistants. Overwhelmingly women of color, immigrant women, and trying to just be able to get, pay for time off, sick pay, because the state considers them independent contractors. So if you don't work that day, you're not getting paid. You don't work the holiday, you're not getting paid, so we go on all day.
These are all the issues of reproductive justice, because we talk about health and well-being. We're talking about physical, emotional, spiritual, cultural, political, economic, environmental, and social well-being.
Exactly.
So, I think where the reproductive justice movement can grow stronger is advocating for economic policies. Like New Voices supports the Fight for 15. New Voices is a part of the victory we had around paid sick days in Pittsburgh. But that's going to be challenged legally, because you have people who don't want to see. People have 3 whole days of paid sick days. 3 days.
Fighting for 3 days.
And so New Voices is even, we're growing, but we're still a small organization. That's like a standard. Like, you need healthy people to be productive in society and whatever the career that they're in.
Exactly.
So our economic well-being is deeply connected to our ability to live, to exercise our human rights and achieve reproductive justice.
Is that you're telling people who working with elderly, probably more sick people, to go to work sick,
and get them sick.
Exactly, a continuous cycle.
It's a cycle.
Exactly. But before we go, I wanted to touch on, something that I have heard about, obviously, as a progressive person, but really didn't understand or know much about. And I went to a training this past July in Cincinnati. It was with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, which was an amazing training. I met so many people, so many Black people organizing here in Ohio that, you know, had started organization I had never heard of before, but that's doing really great work, especially around education and mass incarceration. But one thing that really stuck out to me, because like I said, I just really didn't know much about it, and you had just touched on it a little bit earlier, but it was environmental justice.
Yes.
And so, you know, some of the things that I found, it was, you know, talking about how houses with lead-based paint leads to behavioral disorders, which they did a study that, I don't know the percentage now, a very large percentage of men in prison, they've determined had lead poisoning, which led to like behavioral disabilities, ADD, you know, so started off with, you know, having problems in school, and then, you know, we see what happens there. You know, you get in trouble at school, and then that just leads into other things. So I wanted, because a lot of people, you know, who are progressive, they when they talk about environmental justice, they know climate change, and that's it. Fracking, yeah. And then it kind of ends there. Maybe they might know about food deserts, but then
and they also see they don't see themselves in the work. I mean, that's not the case everywhere. Like Oakland has amazing environmental justice organizing, and other large cities like New York, obviously, like we act for we act for reproductive justice. We act for environmental justice. Our colleague Oganaya Dotson-Newman, who does amazing work, and so New Voices added our definition of health to include the environment back in 2009 after we had did a small workshop called Kinks, Locks, and Twists. We were connecting the products, the personal hair and beauty products that Black women use, that women of color use, that are targeted to women of color, and how that not only impacts our reproductive health, but how those things impacted the environment. And for the last 8 years, we've hosted a conference called Kinks, Locks, and Twists, Environmental and Reproductive Justice Conference, where we're talking about this specific intersection and, you know, how it is about climate change and it is about clean air and clean water, because, you know, anything in the environment is impacting people of color and low-income people, whether you're here in the United States or around the world.
Because where they're most likely to put the factory that's got all the smoke going into the poor neighborhood. Exactly.
And so we see high rates of asthma and chronic lung conditions.
Yeah, I read a report that Black children are 5 times more likely to die from an asthma attack than white children. When I saw it, I was like, I was like, why is that? Where are they at?
Right. Well, and in cities
that the white children are at, that they have this asthma bad like this.
Well, and where we live, what we call the Rust Belt, so that's Western Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and places like that. You know, these were manufacturing cities. And so in Pittsburgh, I can say that there's still a lot of manufacturing happening. There's still steel mills in our city. And, you know, the chemicals are in the air, and it's called particulate matter. And then how that, you know, depending on where the location of these manufacturing facilities are, you know, those chemicals are, you know, traveling down the rivers and into poor communities that were built on rivers, because that's people lived there so that they could go to work.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there has to be a connection between the environment and any kind of social justice movement, because it's going to disproportionately impact people of color, Black people in particular. And there's not, the leadership pipeline, again, isn't being developed. And that's our next area of work, is to develop Black women as leaders in environmental justice. You know, there's a Environmental Protection Agency hearing in Pittsburgh this week that we're going to be a part of, because if we're not there, like you are, like you talk about, you're the only person, the only Black person, only person of color, we are that too. And so, but it has to be, you know, a part of the larger framework for reproductive justice in a more strong and powerful way. And that environmental health and justice is a part of health overall. And that's connected to an initiative that we have been working on called the Black Women's Health Agenda, where we talk about the environment and how that has not only health impacts on our Black women, our families, and communities, has reproductive impact on on our bodies and just our general health and well-being. And so that's part of the work. Many layers,
Yes.
many intersections
layers.
of the work that we do at the local, state, and national level.
RJ is definitely like an onion.
Many layers.
It is.
So we're going to wrap up, but we always end our podcast with a segment called Let's Get It On.
Okay.
And talk about any upcoming events we may have.